We're live.
Now, there we go. There we go. It's Fairfield County Live and Local. We're presented by the Sono Collection. I'm John Kamal from 95.9 The Fox. And Greg, tonight I billed you as possibly the most influential man in the Connecticut music scene. And I think so, dude. And I want to get into why. But it's Greg Knight. Thank you for being here, dude.
John, thank you so much for having me on. I did definitely call my mom when you filled me as that, but I don't know if it's true completely. Just, you know, a big music supporter. I got really sick of trying to learn diminished scales, and I started writing. Here I am.
We all. Didn't we all? Didn't we all? Once they started talking about Ionian, I was out.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, yeah, it was like the circle of thirds for me as far as I got.
Right. Fifths. Yeah.
No, that's it. I drew the line of thirds. But no, thank you. That's it. Yeah. So that's all. But thanks for having me on. Thank you for all that you do for local music in this little kind of corner of the world that makes a whole bunch of noise.
Yeah, it does make a whole bunch of noise. And I'm glad you said that. And it's been a common theme with guests that I've had on over the last couple. I mean, really since this thing started, but particularly over the last month. There's a buzz going on right now. The vaccines are, working, Johnson & Johnson aside, and shows are starting to get, we won't even talk about that. But there's a buzz happening right now in a state that really already had a lot going for it. But before we get too deep into that, though, you've made your entire life around music. I think we have that in common. When did music become a presence in your life? Not just, I like this song, I'm a little kid, my parents are playing this, but when was that musical awakening for you?
Yeah, well, I have an older sister who she's an incredible musician, incredible violinist, and she was probably 8 or 9 and started getting pretty serious on violin. And I wanted to be similar to her, but I didn't want to do the exact same thing. So I started taking piano lessons, and that was the thing for a while. I don't know that I would have thought I'd be this kind of deeply immersed in music still. But, when I was in high school, I picked up guitar and played a whole bunch of Dave Matthews covers at local coffee houses, that kind of stuff.
As you do.
Yeah, it's a rite of passage. And, I think at the time I knew it could be something in my life. I don't know if necessarily being on stage was going to be the thing, although it's easy to say in retrospect, but certainly something that I always wanted to be around. And so just trying to stick around still.
Yeah, dude. Well, I mean, before we get into it though, what were your earliest influences? What was the first thing that you heard that was this is something I want to do?
So it's a really interesting mix because, as you know, a big jam band guy, but I was really into hip hop at first. The first 2 CDs I owned was Jagged Little Pill by Alanis Morissette,
right,
and hip hop, and It's Dark as Hell and It's Hot, DMX. And so, it was really I still kind of worship the written word. I majored in English. I used to make a lot of hip hop. I produced a bunch of hip hop, and as just a musician that tinkers on a whole bunch of instruments, jam music has always spoken to me, and so beyond the Daves of the world, really getting into kind of some of the deeper jazz influence stuff like Medeski Martin Wood, Schofield, it was I didn't know a guitar could go this far. And then I was introduced to Phish in high school, and I think the rest was history because I don't know that it was exactly just the music. I didn't hear Phish cover Boogie On and be like, this is the real deal, as much as there's actually a thriving traveling community around just hearing the next notes. And I thought that was the most incredible thing, right? If I could immerse myself in a world that people kind of thought this way too. And, it didn't just make your parents mad. That was it, and so it's been a winding path, but we're getting there.
Right. Well, and you're such a big part of that community building, the work you've done, the work you did on stage, but also behind the scenes. And I'm curious, when did that shift happen? Like the first time we were just talking before this started about the first time we actually met was at a show of yours in New Haven. You were DJing. When did the shift happen from being a performer yourself to being like, well, let's see what I can do behind the scenes?
Probably around 6 years ago or so, I'd say. John, Coach Lombardi,
Yeah.
Goose's road manager, is he just he peer pressured me into hopping into the van for some weekends to sell merch and move some things around. And I realized at the time that I was in a van with Goose, like a band I really believed in their infancy. And I realized like they weren't really thinking about controlling the narrative around what they were doing. And it's not easy to think about, when you're just on tour for the first time, like you're not thinking about the story that's being told. But I realized the value in that at the time. And I realized also that I had a liberal arts degree that I really needed to use in some sense. And so, I was lucky enough to just kind of take the keys and be able to drive the car as far as learning how to get the word out there. And it's something that just, it worked for me. At the time it was like, I can use adjectives that I haven't used since the SATs, one.
Yeah.
And like to be kind of like on the front line and be able to talk to people and meet people that are seeing and experiencing this music for the first time, it's one of my favorite things, and so that opportunity has just blossomed, and I realize now how much bands of like across all genres, artists across all genres can and really should leverage their community, because it starts at home.
I mean, you mentioned controlling the narrative, and on your bio on your website, it's your mantra, it's your mission statement, I think would probably be the best way to put it. But that all started with your involvement with Goose, your involvement in this industry. From that aspect, from the PR aspect, began with Goose. And just like your own podcast, we're turning this into not a Goose podcast, but like it started with Goose. I remember I spoke to Matt Kalinsky, their manager, and he told me about the first time he heard Arcadia. For people who aren't Goose fans, one of their biggest songs, maybe their signature song. He heard Arcadia, and there was the thing that he heard, and he was like, yeah, these are the guys. It wasn't live, it was a YouTube video, but he was like, these are the guys. What was it for you with that band that made you feel like, yeah, I can work with these guys and I can create a narrative that's going to get them to another level?
Yeah. So I think I heard kind of the spark with them that I realized, like, before Goose existed, when they were Visudo, or at least a few members of Goose were in Visudo. And this was in the prime time of my DJ career. They actually played at UConn the same night that I was DJing, and I got a significantly smaller band, or significantly smaller crowd watching me. And we ended up closing early, and I went to see them and kind of just like heard that I knew that there was something there. And I guess, like, I don't know, I just kind of hung around, I hung around for long enough where they needed me. But, I think it's just, every single band, it's like the first time you get mentioned in the newspaper, the first time you're on a podcast, the first time, people talk about you, you're so excited, really, no matter what it is. I can't tell you like how many bands I work with where the first articles about them, like, there's so many factual errors, names are spelled wrong, but they're just stoked, right? And so certainly I think in some senses all press is good press, but like to really just nail what people are saying about you from day one can serve you 10 years later, I think. Can you hear me? Did I just break up a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
Yeah. Small one.
So, if you nail it early on, it's like, and you can just start to tell that story early, it allows for the story to resonate with the people around you and the people who are just kind of learning about it. And it makes the whole thing a little bit more inclusive. And I think as humans, like, we are inclined to not dive headfirst into things, right? Especially like things we're going to spend a bunch of money on and go see shows, across the country. But just to feel that little bit of like I'm in, and that togetherness, and be able to tell that story for people and bring them in is like, it was always there, I think, with this band and a lot of the people around the band I've been seeing music with for a long time. And to some extent, I think they know what a scene should look like, right? I've seen Fish shows and Dave shows with a bunch of people who are close to the band. And we've always kind of said, like, if this were our scene, we could do X, Y, and Z differently. And now we actually have the chance.
Yeah, it's that community building. And oh my gosh, you said something a second ago, and I had a thought on it, and it's completely jumped out of my head. What was it? I just the way that you created that community, or we're a part of creating that community around, again, to use Goose as the example. You see, Wolfpack did that fantastically. Jack Stratton had a look. It went beyond the music. It was a look. It was a way of marketing. And since the record deal is kind of dead, and it's gone back to grassroots, but all through the net, I guess what I'm asking is, what was the process of building the image, the community, and the look of the band? Like, take me from the beginning. Like, how did you go about at least helping craft that?
I mean, most of these things weren't planned, like there wasn't like
right.
In 2015, we all decided to try and sprout mustaches as much as like,
right.
I think like the idea around a strong management team and a strong PR team is really empowering artists to run with their ideas and doing the best to make those ideas grow and soar, right? Like there's in I think this scene specifically, the level of authenticity that you can provide to people and just like bringing them in, letting them know who you are. And as weird as it is, we're just going to wear these clothes and have these mustaches and hope it catches on. It's like, it's really, that's so much of that was just the band. And I am at times a contrarian, and I am like not one to always dive like headfirst into the ideas. And so like I learned a lot through just the power of consistency with like being comfortable in who you are. If you do that day in and day out, people will start to talk about it and it will latch on, no matter if it's good or bad, whatever, like as long as you have that level of comfortability in like yourself and your musicianship, the rest of it comes, like
it has to be authentic. It can't be something that's like, we're going to market this way and we're going to do it this way.
Right.
If I'm hearing it correctly, it's just a matter of knowing your artist and knowing what to bring out in them. Like, what made me into these guys? How can I best portray what got me into this band to everybody that's around me?
Exactly.
And so, I mean, to move beyond Goose, now you've got a portfolio that's crazy. I mean, go to greggknightmusic.com. Like, seriously, if you're watching this, keep it on, but also go to greggknightmusic.com. Le Special, Pigeons Playing Ping Pong, Twiddle, newer artists, Melt. How did it grow beyond just Goose? When did that process start to happen? Because every big band, every up and coming band in the tri-state area seems to be, or in northern New England for that matter, seems to be involved with you. You seem to be in business with them. How did you grow?
So, I mean, part of it was kind of at the end of 2019 was when I really started feeling comfortable in what I guess can do in a PR role.
Yeah.
Prior to that, like I attributed much of my success to Goose, as like rightfully so. There was nobody expected things to happen with them the way that it did. But part of it is there's kind of like a strange void, especially in the jam world, where managers are really, really good at managing, and there aren't that many publicists, right? Because you don't see jam artists in Rolling Stone or Spin that much. We have our Jam Base, we have our Live for Live Music, we have our Relics, like that kind of stuff. And so, for me, it was just like, I worked really hard to establish relationships at a lot of different outlets. And much of it was like incessantly emailing people about Goose when they were a tiny baby band. And finally, they made a little bit of noise and people responded. But, I then I guess understood there was a little bit more value to my perspective. And at the start of the pandemic, it really, we all know it shook up the music world. People left, and people just, a lot of bands wanted a few new ideas or just some consistency. And
no, right, because the show isn't there anymore. You don't have the live show. You've got the recordings, and that's great, but you've heard them before. What are you going to do to keep things moving? And of course, you have to progress the image of the band, even though you don't have. I'm sorry, I'm jumping on your answer, but when you say it, it makes total sense. I'm sorry, continue. So the effect of the pandemic. Yeah.
Right. And so, that is, I think, where the whole control your own narrative comes into play. Like, there are a ton of bands who have let selling out the cap speak for itself, like all this stuff, rightfully so, but when there's no shows on the horizon and, you have a bunch of good tunes and some really good content and some ideas, but no kind of glue to put it all together, at least with some words that you can send to an outlet, that's where I come in. And so it's been a cool process, to also be able to sit and talk to artists about who they are, and there are bands who have been on the road for 5 years, just grinding, bigger venues, so much success, who actually haven't taken the time to think who are we really, and that's been a cool thing. How is this story really going to be told? And so, I think that's where a lot of opportunity opened up, and I was surprised that people were hitting me up for stuff. I still am. And, this isn't just, a business thing of there's no guarantees with PR, but really it's the more you empower artists, the stronger they can be, ask a couple questions that they didn't think about. And you can come out with something brand new.
What's an example of one of those questions?
So I was at Suwannee Rising. This is not a client of mine. This is not an official announcement or anything, but I was at Suwannee Rising on Saturday, and I had a long conversation with Melody Trucks, right, who is the daughter of Butch Trucks from the Allman Brothers, for all you youngins out there. And we talked about theoretically, what would be the first step in me working with their band. And I referenced, not starting at the new songs or anything, but actually starting at the elephant in the room is that you're the daughter of Butch Trucks, and you're always going to have to live with that. I did some work for
Derek too,
and a cousin. Yeah, exactly. And all, and she only plays percussion without a slide. So, but I had done some work for Midnight North, it's Graham Lesch's band, and thinking about how to step out of a shadow that has kind of propelled you to where you are in certain senses. But what sets you apart, what makes you unique is it's not what a lot of artists necessarily think about, unless you're Mono Neon and you're I know I'm unique and I'm going to blow people's minds here, but it's anyone who's true to their art form is making their art, and the best of the best don't think about their competitors, right? It's not like Picasso was yo, I'm gonna paint the most surreal thing ever. It's you don't really think about that, but you also have to acknowledge really who you are and be comfortable in that,
Right. So it's not even just about letting the artist focus on the art and taking care of all the other business, but it's about empowering, bringing more out of them, or at least putting them in a space where they feel comfortable to open up more with their audience. Anyway, so I mean, if you've been watching this the whole time and you find this all fascinating, and if you're not finding this fascinating, I don't know what to tell you, because I think it's awesome. You should listen to Greg's podcast. It's the Great Beyond podcast, and I love what you've done with this. But before we get into actually talking about the Great Beyond podcast, we have two special guests that I would like to bring on as well. We've got Joey and we've got Bruce, neither of whom I've ever met in real life before. Nice to meet you guys.
Nice
you
to meet
too.
you, John. How you doing?
Thanks for having us.
I'm doing great. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for doing this on short notice too. You know, when Greg mentioned this to me, I was pumped at the prospect of having you all here to talk about this. So the Great Beyond podcast is, you know, I mentioned to you earlier, Greg, that even this conversation was turning into Not a Goose podcast. But when I saw you guys doing the marketing for it, and when I saw even listening to the intro of your first episode, what was going through my head was like, okay, yeah, it's Not a Goose, but that's great. Okay, fine. It's a Goose podcast. Let's get to the Goose. By the end of the episode, I knew exactly what you guys were talking about when you said it's not a Goose podcast. But maybe you guys can explain it better than I can. What does that mean?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Right.
We're too nice. Too nice.
I mean, it's really like the conversation may start with Goose, and it's the same thing if you go to a show at a Goose show. Like you always start by talking about the first set and how great it was. But by the end, you're going to be talking about your hometown, friends you grew up with. You happen to know somebody. Like the conversation always steamrolls into something else. So I think it's just the nature of talking about music, specifically live music, where we might start on a topic that relates to Goose or doesn't relate to Goose, but it's always going to steamroll into something else. So being open to that and just saying, all right, this isn't specifically about Goose. We're not just breaking down shows and that's all we do. Like it's truly just good conversation.
Right, because you have what you're talking about in the first half of the show. Certainly for the pilot episode, the first half of it was, you know, talking about, obviously they have upcoming album Shenanigans Nightclub. You guys went over that. You guys were talking about Sewanee hadn't happened yet, but you were talking about the lead up to that. But then the second half of the episode was where I really got interested, because you had the editor of Live for Live Music on as a guest. Yeah. And the topic of conversation was fantastic for people who haven't checked it out yet. The idea of the torch, of passing the torch, has been, you know, a source of some trolling and some viral, ridiculous conversations on fan sites everywhere, I'm sure, with every jam band out there. But you guys took it out of the individual band. Or the individual bands, and you focused on the concept of great jam bands throughout the era passing the torch to each other. And I listened to it, and my first thought was, damn it, this is what I've always wanted to do a podcast on, and it never quite got here on this show. And shit, you guys are doing exactly what I wanted to, what I want to talk about. Well, first of all, explain the concept of the torch to people, because I love this.
So the proverbial torch. Well, the concept is that there's kind of this lineage of bands that are in the live scene, and we call it the jam scene now, but it really includes a lot of live acts and a lot of live bands, and that just show their prowess out there. And that kind of stemmed from the Dead, breaking up and Fish kind of stealing the limelight a little bit in the 90s. And this is where it gets specific to kind of our scene and the scene that Goose is in right now, and where a lot of people really want to, keep these bands on high and hold them up on a pedestal, and that it can kind of only be one at a time that's the greatest going. And then this idea, or more of a joke really, on our fan site turned into this really like hot button topic, where people were joking about maybe Fish passing the torch to Goose. People try to draw similarities between the bands, and but like we talked about on the podcast, like you mentioned, it's something that it transcends one specific band or even one lineage of bands, and it probably has been some sort of conversation that fans have had, whether jokingly or seriously,
right,
for many, many years. And it's just that it's been so prevalent in the Goose scene for the last 2 years, kind of because of these connections people make to Fish. and because of how people really will take a bullet for Trey. So it's pretty insane how crazy those conversations
Or fire
have
one,
gotten.
you know.
Yeah, or
You know,
potentially fire one,
heartbeat.
depending on what side of
Oh
that.
my
that
god!
sword
Especially
you're
if he's playing with the dead. But
Yeah.
this is what you guys did that I wanted to figure out for the longest time. Like, you know, like I was always a big Mike and Mike fan in the morning, ESPN radio. You know,
Oh, yeah.
and then I would switch gears and I would listen to the Fan in the afternoon on the drive home. I always thought to myself in my head, why the hell doesn't anybody do this with bands? Why is this not more of a thing? Why does this only exist in the dark crevices of a comment section somewhere that will inevitably just turn ugly and stupid no matter what happens? You guys are doing that. What are some other, you know, I mean, and I don't want to ruin future episodes, but what are some other potential topics of conversation you guys are thinking of bringing up in upcoming episodes?
So, well, one, to your point, I think the jam scene is unique in that there's this rabid fandom here, like crazy, and because the music can get a little bit complex, we can all convince ourselves that we are music connoisseurs. So, you know, it drives this aggressive conversation forward. Just wanted to send that to everyone watching at home, who will inevitably talk about the torch in the comments.
Everybody needs to hear that.
That's you, Darren.
Everybody needs to hear that.
So I think that there's that. But as far as episodes go, I don't want to reveal too much. Episode 2 is, Joey, would you agree, quite possibly the best podcast episode ever recorded?
I mean, it was like the most in-depth conversation I've ever had. Like, we can't reveal too much, but like, it should have been episode 1. Like, we would have been number 1 in Apple Podcasts if it was episode 1.
Yep, with confidence. And so, stay tuned for episode 2. Episode 3 is coming next week. John, it's a little complex, but it'll make sense in time.
Okay.
But we're going to talk about a lot of
issues there.
We have, we just had our call with HR. I think we have a lot kind of coming down the pipeline that will evolve as the band that the podcast is not about evolves. And you know, we're going to talk about some of the aspects of the music, maybe covers, and then a lot of aspects about the scene. But I think the number one thing that we all agreed on is that we want this to be a community type of, you know, podcast, community endeavor. And so we want to hear from people as much as possible for where we can go next with all of this. And I'm glad one of our first stops was Fairfield County Live and Local.
Thank you. I'm glad as well. And speaking of it, I do have to humble brag since we are talking about Goose and I'm hanging out with Gooseheads. First ever covers, specifically first ever time played live. Atlantic City was on this show. It was on this. It was. Hey, if you listen to that,
Thank you in a bunch.
Thank you,
Bruce. I really like that.
Thank you very much. That was on the old version of this show. You can actually no. I uploaded it to this first. It was before I was affiliated with the. It was before I was on the station. But yeah, no, yeah, it exists. It's out there. So we've talked a lot about community. Greg, you talking about building communities around bands and around a scene. Obviously, The Great Beyond is a podcast dedicated not just to the Goose community, but to the jam, the live music, whatever you want to call it, community at large. Now, Bruce and Joey, are you guys CT guys as well?
Yep. Yeah. Born and raised for me. Yeah.
I'm from Long Island, but we got 95.9 across the sound. So.
That's right. And you know what? I appreciate the Long Island listens. But no, the reason I ask though is you see so many I mentioned Greg to you at the beginning of this episode that there's a buzz going around Connecticut right now. And you're starting to see news articles written about it, Connecticut Post, Stanford Advocate, stuff like that coming out about how Connecticut has turned into this central hub for the live music scene. What do you guys think it is about Connecticut that makes the music scene here so strong?
I mean, partly for me, I think that one of the easiest answers is we're close to New York City. And we're like, but we're not only close to New York City, but we're between New Haven and Hartford. And we've got Boston that's not far away. Philly's not that far away. So like that being central in this part of the Northeast where a lot of people are coming through is super helpful. And a lot of us, it's easy for a lot of us to go see a lot of bands because everybody comes through, you know, within a 3 or 4 hour distance. So, you know, that's the case for a lot of people. But it's some parts are harder to pinpoint. You know, we have some very cool venues in Connecticut that have a lot of history to them. They're a lot of fun to play at, and they always get good crowds. So that partly is maybe one thing. But I noticed when I was growing up, and even in Wilton, where I grew up, like we just started as I got older, we had more and more kids that were going to see more and more shows and more concerts in the city, or more local concerts, and more kids playing in bands. Even in my school, besides some of the kids in Goose that followed me, but we had some really good jazz players that were, you know, a couple grades above me to a couple grades below me, and a lot of kids did a lot of stuff. So, you know, it just kind of blossomed during my lifetime, at least, and some of that is kind of harder to pinpoint why. I'm pretty happy about it, and it's been pretty great, you know, growing up in an area where we've had a lot of great live music and a lot of people to go see shows with. But you know, maybe that just kind of perpetuates itself.
Well, Greg, I was gonna say, what do you think, man? Because the community is so strong, and the musicianship around here is so strong.
Yeah, I mean, to call it, I think, a spade also, like, people here have expendable income to spend on things that they really like, and music has been one of those things for a long time.
Right.
We're almost like close enough to New York and close enough to Boston where no band would have really had to stop here ever, right? But the Dead was playing the New Haven Coliseum, right? Even WWE was going to the Coliseum. Like, people here, we're lucky to be nestled in this little corner of the world where people can pursue those interests, you know, and like not only buy tickets, but maybe buy a pin. But I think like this is, you know, it's been here for a long time. But things like Vibes, you know, Gathering of the Vibes for those of you listening.
For
the uninitiated.
Yeah, just in case I didn't know every word in the name. Thank you.
Yeah. Like, I mean, stuff like that, like, which I think all of us probably miss dearly now, did a whole bunch for this area. But even like the commitment in each city to consistent live music that, one, gives everyone here who has a dream to play an opportunity to do so, but also live touring acts to come through. Like, I shout out to Black Rock. You know, I lived on Jetland Place around the corner from Bryac when it first opened, and it was like crazy to me that this place could have free music Wednesday to Sunday, to have like world-class musicians playing every single night.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And like not just free music, but like Kung Fu and Deep Banana Black Guy.
Right.
Every Wednesday.
It's
for no money.
Crazy. Yeah. You know, like, and I mean, like, half of what I learned as far as how to kind of interact in the industry, certainly how to interact behind a stage, like, was learned just spending time at these venues and having the opportunity to be able to see someone like, you know, Tim Palmieri or Adrian or Rob Somerville playing, you know, 5 feet away. And then you go to other places, having just come back from Florida and seeing a few different bands, not at Solani, I'm talking about, like, you realize just how special that is, you know? And so it certainly has encouraged me to work a whole lot harder.
Yeah, man.
Sorry if I broke up there. It encouraged me to work a whole lot harder.
Yeah. Well, I mean, dude, the hard work is paying off. Like I said, you're a piece of like every awesome band in the tri-state area. And it's true, man. It's true.
We make fun of them for that. Yeah, it is true.
So if my cheesy tease at the top of this, in the description of this video, worked, and you are here to find out why this man right here, directions are fun, is the people's publicist, the most influential man in the Connecticut music scene. That is why someone who controlled their own narrative. And I mean, dude, I'm just so excited to see what this podcast does, Greg. I'm so excited to see what what you continue to do. But before we get going, guys, you've already teased the literal greatest podcast episode of all time. So I mean, we kind of already got there. What else is coming up, though? What else is happening? I almost said something inappropriate. I'm sorry.
So something me and Greg got to do.
Forgetting how to speak.
Something me and Greg got to do is we were both down in Swanee last weekend. So a big part of the podcast we want to be is the fact that the fans are going to be a big part of it. So we went around during Goose Set Break and just interviewed a bunch of people. Some of them I see are in the comments right now. So, even the day before, the day after, like we were interviewing anyone we ran up to who had a Goose shirt. Like I ran into people who the one guy proposed to his girlfriend literally right next to me on the river and got an interview with them. So it's going to be a lot of cool stuff with fans. And then eventually when Goose goes on tour, we're going to be doing the same thing where just going up to people at Set Break before the show, after the show, getting their take, getting their stories. So it really is. I think you guys touched on it earlier. Like it's going to be the fans podcast rather than just a Goose podcast,
One thing, we'll have something very special planned for Westville. For those of you who make it to Westville. Hometown shows. We want to make it work for everybody.
It's going to be an elegant event.
That's so funny. Yeah. That's so funny that you said that because I definitely bought tickets for the 12th, and I'm definitely super excited.
Oh hell yeah!
There we go. Awesome. John, before you wrap it up, too, I want to say. There's been a lot of formative years in all of this happening for bands like Goose, for people like me, for even like someone, even the guys on the podcast. And so
Greg,
much.
Why do I get the feeling you're about to make me cry?
I'm ready.
So much about, I think, why you're able to have a thriving podcast weekly where you're interviewing people that have attained a certain level of success in all of this. Is because people like you have been so committed to all of this for so long. Not just when you're playing with Tracy Joe and the Toads, Mojo, Spyboy, Throwback, it's still a blues. Like
there's a list.
And there's a
long ass list of Connecticut bands that I've been a part of, dude.
But I mean, that really sets the bar really high to see someone who I used to watch on stage and try to scream harmonies over the covers so someone would notice to this now and manning 95.9 at 4 a.m. is like there's a reason why. And so I'm just very thankful that there have been so many people who have set that example. And I really appreciate you having all of us on today.
I'm a cog in a great machine, man. This is a great it's popular to make fun of Connecticut, but it's occasionally a pretty great place to live, dude. Thank you for saying that, man.
Definitely.
I appreciate that.
Of course.
Let's close on this. Darren has been a fantastic part of this show in his own right in the comment section. My man. But I think I like this question because we're all knocking on wood so hard when we say it, but it does feel like we're getting back to a semblance of normalcy. What is your greatest hope for live music going forward and into 22?
At least for me, that obviously the same hope I think that everybody has, that we can kind of move forward in a little bit more of a normal style in terms of just how we live our lives and what we're able to do and what other people are able to do. And we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping, at least in terms of this year and for live music, that things can go off without a hitch, that everybody's still trying to be somewhat safe and trying to have these specialized shows and that they all go off without any sort of big, super spreader event happening or anything like that. And that can help kind of ease us into 2022 and hopefully set us up for a really good year next year.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest thing you said, Bruce, was that everyone can stay safe. is the biggest hope. And then
Yes.
also that,
Yes.
I mean, mainly I think living in the city, like these little small venues can open back up again safely, and that everyone can go back to work who works there. Because any time I've ever gone, like I've never had problems with people at small venues. Like they're great people, and I just really hope they can get back to normalcy, you know, get back to work. These small, you know, bands can get back on stage. I'm sporting my Danby shirt. I've seen them at the Bowery Electric I don't know how many times. So
Yeah.
like to see, you know, all these small bands that I love again, like that's what I really hope to get back to. Just Thursday, Fridays, looking up who's playing at what venue and just going on a whim, because I definitely missed that.
Right.
I think the past year has been kind of an exercise in how all of us can be as far away from each other as possible, you know, to stay safe. And, you know, that's like physically, but also, you know, I think the difficulties of the past year have allowed all of us to be kind of siloed. And so I hope that as we make a safe return to all of this, I might be a safe return to all this, like that we can maintain that community aspect, because as I've said many times, that's why I'm good at my job. So I need everybody who's listening.
Please keep listening.
Please. Yeah.
Well, guys, I want to thank you one more time for being on the show this evening. And for people who are watching right now, for people who are going to watch this in the future, this Sunday on 95.9 The Fox at 9 p.m., we're going to have a full playlist of just Greg Knight artists. It's going to be all people who work with. Yep, who work with Greg Knight. That is going to be an entire hour from 9 to 10, Sunday night on 95.9 The Fox. If you live in Fairfield County, Connecticut, or parts of Long Island, you can listen on 95.9 FM. If you do not live in that area, no problem. Right down there, directions again, is the link, 959thefox.com. You can stream from anywhere in the entire world. Sunday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, an entire hour of Greg Knight music, all artists represented by Greg Knight. Fellas, thank you once again for being on tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks,
John, thank you.
Absolutely. Stick around for a sec when I take us off live. But yeah, thanks again to everybody watching. 9 p.m.